3 days before my son's retirement celebration dinner, a woman I'd known for 30 years pulled me into the back of her flower shop, locked the door behind us, and told me to stop breathing so loudly. That was Meredith Walsh's way of saying something was very wrong. I'd stopped by her shop on Elgin Street to pick up the floral centerpieces I'd ordered for Saturday. Meredith has done flowers for every occasion in my family since my husband Gordon's funeral 12 years ago. Anniversaries, christenings, one very small and very quiet birthday party the year I turned 60 and didn't feel like celebrating. She knows me the way only someone who's handed you flowers at a graveside can know you. She met me at the door before I even reached for the handle. Her face was wrong. She's a woman who smiles the way other people breathe, automatically, constantly. And she wasn't smiling. "Come in the back," she said. "Now, don't talk." I followed her past the refrigerated cases and the buckets of cut lilies to a narrow doorway into a workroom that smelled of damp stems and potting soil. She closed the door, turned off the overhead light. A thin strip of yellow came through the gap at the bottom. "Meredith, what on earth?" She put one finger to her lips. And then I heard them. Two voices coming through the wall from the consultation room next door. Her shop shares a wall with the small meeting space she rents out by the hour to local businesses. My son's voice, low and careful the way he gets when he's trying to sound reasonable. And a woman's voice I didn't recognize, clipped, professional, the voice of someone reading from a document. "The transfer has to be completed before she signs the gift deed Saturday night," my son said. "Once she signs, the asset freeze clause activates and we lose the window." The woman responded, "The account in her name at RBC, we move it to the holding company first, then to the Isle of Man Trust by Tuesday. The Cayman account is the final destination. It clears before any provincial review could flag it." I felt my knees do something strange. I pressed my hand against the wall to stay upright. "She won't question it," my son said. "She trusts me completely. That's the whole point." I stood in the dark and let those words settle over me like cold water. She trusts me completely. That's the whole point. My son was talking about me. I was 63 years old. I had spent 11 years rebuilding the family accounting firm after Gordon died, working 18-hour days so that Whitmore and Associates wouldn't quietly disappear the way everyone said it would. I hissed, "There's something you need in here. There's something you need in here." I handed him the title of managing partner 3 years ago when my arthritis made the long winters harder. I had trusted him with everything because he was all I had left. And he was in the next room describing how to steal it. Meredith found my hand in the dark and held it tight. We waited. We listened to the sound of papers shuffling, of chairs scraping, of two people who didn't know they'd been overheard saying goodbye and letting themselves out through the street-facing door. Then silence. Meredith turned the light back on. Her eyes were wet. "They were here Tuesday as well," she whispered. "Same conversation. I didn't know what to do. I kept telling myself I misunderstood. Then I called you." "Who was the woman with him?" "She came in a car with a Vancouver plate. I wrote it down." She pressed a slip of paper into my palm. "I'm sorry, June. I'm so sorry." I looked at her handwriting on that little piece of paper. I looked at the flowers in their buckets on the counter, pale and ordinary and perfectly real. Then I looked at the door my son had walked out through. I said, "I need to get to my solicitor." I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. Not then. I drove from Meredith's shop to the offices of Holloway, Park & Associates on Spark Street, and the whole way I kept thinking about a morning 12 years earlier. Gordon's second week in the ICU. Our son was 26, sitting in a hospital corridor with his head in his hands, and I'd put my arm around him and said, "I need you to be steady. I need you to help me hold this together." And he had. He'd stepped up in ways I hadn't expected. He'd worked nights at the firm while I sat with Gordon. He'd handled clients I couldn't face. He'd been, for those first 2 years, exactly who I needed him to be. When had that changed? When had I stopped seeing it change? Nora Park had been my solicitor for 9 years. She was waiting at the door of her office when I arrived, which meant Meredith had called ahead. I was grateful for that. It meant I didn't have to find the words to start. She sat across from me, said nothing while I told her everything, and took notes on a yellow legal pad in her small, precise handwriting. "The account at RBC," she said when I finished. "How much?" "The firm's operating account is around $2.3 million. My personal investment account is just over $1.8 million. The gift deed is for a commercial property in Kanata that appraised at $4.1 million. He was going to have me sign it over to him Saturday as a retirement gift to himself. That was the framing. I thought it was symbolic." Nora set down her pen. "It's not symbolic. I know that now. The Isle of Man Trust and the Cayman account. Those are offshore structures designed to move assets beyond provincial jurisdiction within 72 hours of the initial transfer. If this completes, we would have almost no legal mechanism to reverse it in time." She paused. "He's been planning this carefully." "For how long?" "I don't know yet, but the woman with the Vancouver plate is almost certainly a forensic accountant or a financial planner who specializes in asset transfers. She didn't come from Vancouver for a single meeting." Nora picked up her phone. "I need to call someone." His name was Warren Cheng. He was a retired RCMP financial crimes investigator, 61, now in private practice. Nora had used him twice before. She told me he was fast and discreet and that if there was a trail, he would find it in time. He arrived at Nora's office 40 minutes later, compact, quiet, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He shook my hand, sat down, and said, "Tell me about the firm." I told him. Gordon had founded Whitmore & Associates in 1987. Small accounting practice, mid-sized clients, reputation built slowly over 20 years. When Gordon died, we had 11 full-time staff and 37 long-standing business clients across Ottawa and the Valley. I'd kept every one of them. By the time I handed my son the managing partner role in 2021, the firm was valued at just under $9 million. "And your son, when did he change?" Warren asked. I hesitated. 2 years ago, I said. Maybe a little more. He started making suggestions. Quiet ones at first. Had I thought about full retirement? Had I considered what the firm would look like under new leadership? He said clients had mentioned, and I can't tell you how many times he used that phrase, clients have mentioned that they were wondering about succession, about whether the firm had a future. Warren nodded, wrote something, "And you started to wonder yourself." I started to doubt myself. Yes. "That's intentional. That's how this works." He set down his pen. "Give me 24 hours. I went home. The house was quiet the way it's been quiet for 12 years. The specific quiet of a house where one person used to fill every room and now doesn't. I sat in Gordon's old chair in the study and looked at the photograph on the desk. Gordon at 52, the year he planted the silver maple in the backyard. He was laughing at something off camera. I can't remember what. "I think I missed something," I told him. "I think something went wrong a long time ago, and I was too busy holding the firm together to see it." The silver maple outside the window moved in the November wind. No answer, just the sound of branches. I didn't sleep. At 5:40 in the morning, my phone buzzed. "Warren," a text message, short and without preamble. "Found it. Holding company registered in Alberta, March of this year. 3 transfers from firm accounts over 7 months. Total $340,000. Meeting tomorrow morning. Bring your solicitor." I read it twice. Then I got up and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window watching the maple until the light changed. Warren laid the folders on Nora's conference table the next morning. 3 of them. The first was a corporate registration document, a numbered company registered in Alberta in March with my son listed as sole director. It existed for one purpose, to receive money moved from Whitmore & Associates operating accounts through what appeared to be legitimate vendor payments. The vendor didn't exist. Warren had confirmed it in 2 hours. 7 payments, he said, between April and October. The smallest was $32,000. The largest was $87,000. Total removal from firm accounts, $341,500. all coded as consulting fees for an IT infrastructure review that never happened. I looked at the numbers. My name was on those accounts. My signature was required for transfers over $50,000. I looked at Warren. My signature appears on 3 of the larger transfers, he said. I'd like you to look at them. He slid 3 pages across the table. I looked at my name at the bottom of each document. The signature was close, very close, but the capital J in June was slightly different from mine. I make a long horizontal cross-stroke, and whoever had signed this had a shorter one. Forged, Nora said quietly. Carefully, Warren agreed. The second folder was worse. Warren had traced the numbered company's outgoing transfers. The money hadn't stayed in Alberta. It had moved to an account in British Columbia, then to a corporate structure registered in the Cayman Islands 18 months ago. My son had been building this infrastructure for at least a year and a half before he started moving money. He had planned this the way you plan something you intend to complete. There's more, Warren said. He opened the third folder. Inside were records of client communications, 11 emails sent from what appeared to be a Whitmore and Associates address, but the domain was 1 character different from ours, the kind of difference you'd miss if you weren't looking carefully. The emails had gone to 4 of our longest-standing clients. They were written in my name, in my voice close enough that even I had to read them twice. Each one said a version of the same thing, that I was stepping back due to health concerns, that the transition of their accounts to a new firm, a firm called North Capital Advisory, registered 6 months ago, was already underway, that they shouldn't worry. North Capital Advisory, my son's company. He was stealing your clients at the same time, Nora said. He was dismantling the firm from the inside, Warren said, redirecting the revenue base, moving the cash, and building a competing structure to receive it all. Saturday's gift deed was the final piece. The commercial property in Kanata is the anchor asset for a new office location. I looked at the folders on the table. I looked at Nora, who was watching me carefully. I looked at Warren, who was not. I said, "How much time do we have?" Warren checked his watch. "The celebration dinner is Saturday at 7. If the gift deed is signed that night, the transfer to the holding company initiates automatically. It's been pre-scheduled. The Isle of Man Trust clears by Tuesday morning. After that, the money is outside any realistic legal reach." That's 36 hours. Yes. What do we do? Nora and Warren looked at each other. We go to Saturday's dinner, Nora said. The celebration dinner was my idea originally. 40 years of Whitmore and Associates. Gordon had founded the firm in 1987, and I had kept it alive through everything that came after. I'd invited our 11 staff, 7 key clients, 2 accountants who'd retired after decades with us, and my son, who was, as far as anyone knew, being honored as the future of the firm. There would be 112 guests in the private dining room at the Rideau Club. I spent Saturday in the kind of controlled stillness that comes when you've made a decision and just have to wait for the hour. I did my hair. I wore the navy dress I'd bought in October. At noon, my oldest friend Heloise arrived. She'd flown in from Halifax for the event and didn't yet know any of it. I sat her down at my kitchen table with coffee and told her everything. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then she said, "What do you need me to do?" At 4 o'clock, Nora called. Injunction granted. Judge Renwick signed it this afternoon. All accounts are frozen pending investigation. The Cayman transfer cannot execute tonight, regardless of what happens with the deed. I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't known was held. And the criminal complaint? Filed this morning with the Ottawa Police Financial Crimes Unit. They're aware of tonight. There will be 2 officers present. He'll be expecting a normal dinner. Yes, Nora said. That's the point. I drove to the Rideau Club alone. The room looked the way I'd asked it to look. White tablecloths, low candles, the photographs I'd sent. Gordon in 1987 at the first office on Bank Street, the 2 of us at the 20-year anniversary. The staff photo from 2019, 40 years of one family's work, arranged on a display board near the entrance. My son arrived at 6:45 with his girlfriend, a woman named Layla, whom I'd met twice and who seemed pleasant and entirely unaware of anything unusual. He hugged me at the door. He smelled of the same aftershave he'd worn since university. "You look wonderful, Mom," he said. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. I smiled. He smiled. 36 years of knowing someone's face, and I could see that his smile was the smile of a man who believed Saturday night was going to go exactly as planned. At 7:30, the room had settled and the plates had been cleared, and the event coordinator handed me the microphone. I had written a speech, 3 pages, sitting in my bag. I didn't take them out. I looked out at the faces in that room, staff who'd stayed through difficult years, clients who'd trusted Gordon first and then me, friends who'd watched me rebuild from nothing after I lost him. And I thought about the thing I'd said to my son in that hospital corridor 12 years ago. I need you to be steady. Help me hold this together. "Thank you for being here tonight," I said. My voice was steady. 40 years is a long time to do anything. Gordon used to say that an accounting firm runs on 2 things, accuracy and trust. He meant financial accuracy, obviously. Gentle laughter from the room. But he also meant the other kind, the kind where a client hands you their livelihood and believes you'll protect it. I paused. This week, I discovered that the trust in this room had been violated, not by a stranger, not by a competitor, by the person I trusted most in the world. The room went very quiet. My son's face changed. Over the past 7 months, $341,500 was removed from Whitmore & Associates' operating accounts through fraudulent vendor payments. My signature was forged on 3 of those transactions. I kept my voice level. I had practiced this part in the car. The money was directed to a numbered company registered in Alberta without my knowledge. Someone at the back of the room said quietly, "Oh my God." 4 of our longest-standing clients received emails in my name, from an address designed to look like ours, informing them that their accounts were being moved to a new firm. That firm is called North Capital Advisory. It was registered 6 months ago. My son is the sole director. He stood up. "Mom." "Sit down." My voice didn't shake. "Please." He sat down. Layla's hand was on his arm. She was looking at him the way you look at someone when you realize you don't know them as well as you thought. I pressed the small remote in my left hand. The display board behind me changed from the photograph of Gordon's first office to a document, the Alberta corporate registration, my son's name, the dates, the transfer amounts. I want our clients in this room to know that their accounts are secure. The firm's accounts have been frozen this afternoon by court order pending a full financial investigation. No assets have left Canada. The commercial property in Kanata, which I was asked to sign over tonight as a, quote, gift, will not be transferred. I looked at my son. He was very pale. "I also want you to know that I don't believe he did this alone. The woman who helped him design the offshore structure is the subject of a separate complaint with the British Columbia Securities Commission." I paused. But the decisions were his. Nora stood up from her seat near the window. "Counsel for Mrs. Whitmore," she said clearly, for the room. "The injunction preventing transfer of all named assets is now in effect." From near the door, 2 people in dark jackets stood up from where they'd been sitting. One of them approached my son's table. He looked at me one last time before he stood. Something in his face that I couldn't name. Not remorse exactly, more like the expression of someone who has just realized the ground was never as solid as they believed. "You didn't have to do this here," he said, "in front of everyone." I looked at my son. "You didn't have to do any of this," I said. And yet, he was cautioned and escorted from the room. The room stayed quiet for a long time. Then Heloise stood up from her seat and crossed the room and put her hand on my shoulder, and that was when I finally cried. Just briefly. Just enough. The investigation took 4 months. My son was charged in February with fraud over $5,000, breach of fiduciary duty, forgery of a financial document, and possession of proceeds of crime. He entered a guilty plea in April to 3 of the 4 counts. The forgery charge was stayed as part of the agreement. He was sentenced to 14 months in a federal correctional facility and ordered to repay $341,500 to Whitmore and Associates, plus $47,000 in legal costs. The woman from Vancouver, the financial planner who had designed the offshore structure, was separately investigated by the British Columbia Securities Commission. Her license was suspended pending review. She agreed to cooperate with investigators, which reduced my son's sentence and accelerated the return of the transferred funds. North Capital Advisory was dissolved in January. The 7 clients my son had approached through the fraudulent emails were contacted personally and by letter. 5 of them stayed. 2 had already moved their accounts elsewhere, which I understood. Trust, once shaken, is not always recoverable. Meredith Walsh sent me flowers. I called her and told her she'd saved everything that mattered, and she cried and said she'd almost waited too long, and I told her she hadn't. Warren Chang came to the office in March, officially to close his file. He stayed for 2 hours. We talked about Gordon, about the firm, about what comes next. When he left, he said he had everything handed to him and he still couldn't see what it was worth. I thanked him for that. It was the kind of true thing that helps. I kept going to work. I know that sounds simple. It wasn't. The mornings were the hardest, sitting down at Gordon's old desk, opening the firm's accounts, seeing the numbers that my son had treated as a resource to be extracted rather than a legacy to be carried. But I went in every morning and I did the work, because the work was the thing I had left. In June, I received a letter. No return address, but the postmark was Laval. 3 pages handwritten in my son's handwriting. He said he didn't expect me to reply. He said he had spent 4 months in a cell with enough time to trace back the specific moment when he had decided his resentment was worth more than his integrity. He said it started when I didn't step back after Gordon died the way he thought I should, that he'd expected me to grieve and diminish, and instead I'd expanded, taken up more space, worked harder, become more essential to the firm rather than less. He'd felt crowded out of something he believed was meant to be his. He wrote, "I told myself you were holding on too long. But the truth is, I couldn't stand that you were better at this than I ever was. And instead of working harder, I looked for a shortcut." He said he was sorry. He said sorry felt like an inadequate word for what he'd done. I read the letter twice, then folded it and put it in the drawer of Gordon's desk. I didn't write back. Not then. In August, I had the accounts independently audited and the results certified by an external firm in Toronto. Clean. Fully restored. Every dollar accounted for. The auditor, a woman named Simone Garreau, about 40, thorough in a way I found deeply comforting, handed me the report and shook my hand and said, "This is a very well-run firm, Mrs. Whitmore." I thought about Gordon, about Bank Street in 1987, a second-floor office above a pharmacy, 2 staff and a photocopier that jammed every morning without fail, about the 20 years we'd built it together and the 12 years I'd carried it alone. "We worked hard to make it that way," I said. In October, I promoted Elaine Chow to managing partner. She was 44, had been with the firm for 16 years, knew every client by name and every file by memory. Gordon had hired her. I had watched her become someone I trusted completely in the right way, the way that's earned slowly and never taken for granted. The day I told her, she sat across from me in my office and looked at the offer letter for a long moment. "You're sure?" she said. "Completely," I said. She asked if she could keep Gordon's photograph on the wall. I told her I'd have been concerned if she didn't. In November, the silver maple lost its leaves and the backyard went gray, and I sat in Gordon's chair in the study and thought about what I wanted the next part of my life to look like, not what the firm needed. What I needed. That was a new question for me. In December, I wrote back to my son. 2 pages. I told him that what he'd done had cost me things I couldn't name precisely, not the money, which had been returned, not the clients, most of whom had stayed, but something quieter, the particular grief of learning that a person you believed in had been measuring you against their own needs for years without telling you. I told him I understood, in a way I wished I didn't, what it felt like to grow up in the shadow of someone who was very good at what they did, Gordon had been like that. Effortlessly competent, quietly certain. I'd felt small beside him sometimes, early in our marriage before I found my own steadiness. I should have talked to my son about that. I never had. I told him I wasn't ready to rebuild what we'd had, but I wasn't ready to say never either. I said, I'm not closing the door, I'm not opening it yet, but it's still a door. He called on Christmas morning. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message, which I thought showed a certain wisdom. He called again on the 27th, and I answered. We talked for 20 minutes. About nothing consequential, the weather in Laval, whether the firm had kept the holiday party tradition, whether the silver maple had come through the November ice storm without damage, the conversation of two people who are feeling the edges of something and haven't decided yet how far into reach. When we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Then I put it down and went to make tea and stood at the kitchen window looking at the maple, bare-branched against a January sky. Gordon planted that tree the year our son was born. He said he wanted to watch something grow. I thought about that, about growing things and the patience it takes to do it right, and the difference between tending something and holding it so tightly that it can't find its own way toward the light. I didn't have answers yet, but for the first time in a very long time, I thought I might be asking the right questions. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over you after something like this. Not peace, exactly, more like the stillness after a long storm, when the damage is visible but the air has finally stopped moving. I think about the moment Meredith locked that workroom door and turned off the light. She'd known me for 30 years. She'd handed me flowers at Gordon's graveside. And when she overheard something she didn't fully understand, she didn't look away, didn't convince herself it wasn't her business. She called me. That's a small act in the retelling, but it was everything in practice. It took a kind of moral clarity that I think we underestimate in everyday life. The willingness to do the uncomfortable right thing for someone else when you could just as easily have stayed quiet. I think about Warren Chang, who sat across from me with a notebook and no recorder and said simply, "Tell me about the firm." He didn't assume. He looked at what was actually there. He followed the numbers to where they led rather than where it would have been easier to stop. That kind of rigorous, patient thinking, the willingness to trace a thing to its true source rather than accept the convenient explanation, that's what broke the scheme open. Not luck, not instinct. Careful, methodical intelligence applied with discipline. And I think about myself, honestly, and what I had to do to walk into that dining room at the Rado Club and say what needed to be said in front of 112 people. I had been awake for 36 hours. I had cried once, briefly, and then stopped because I couldn't afford not to. I had written a speech and left it in my bag and spoken without it. That required something I'm not sure I'd have described as courage before all of this, because courage always sounds heroic, and what I felt wasn't heroic. It was just the quiet resolve to not let 30 years of work, 30 years of Gordon's work, disappear because I was too frightened to speak. My son wrote me a letter from Laval that said he'd expected me to diminish after Gordon died, that he'd waited for me to shrink into something he could step over. When I didn't, he called it crowding him out. I've thought about that for months. I don't think he was wrong that I left him less space than I should have. I was so fixed on what I was building that I didn't pay enough attention to how he was growing, or whether he was. That's a real thing I carry. But there's a difference between a wound and a justification. He was hurt. He was also wrong. Both of those are true at the same time. What I know now, more plainly than I ever did before, is that integrity isn't a quality you either have or you don't. It's a practice. You make the honest choice again and again in small moments, at the flower shop, at the notebook, at the podium, and those small choices accumulate into something that holds, or they don't, and everything falls. Meredith practiced it. Warren practiced it. Elaine Chow, who asked me if I was sure when I offered her the managing partner role, practiced it every day she showed up and did the work without looking for a shortcut. The silver maple is still in the backyard. I still talk to Gordon sometimes, which I realize sounds strange, but I don't particularly care. I told him we held it together. I told him we held it together. I told him about Elaine. I told him the firm hit $9.4 million in revenue this year, which is the highest it's ever been. I told him our son called on Christmas morning. I don't know yet what that becomes, but I know I'm not afraid of the question anymore.